Welcome to Black and Psych, and thank you for coming to our event today. Who is Black and Psych? Black and Psych is a platform to promote visibility, community, and networking opportunities between Black professionals and trainees across the field of psychology. We seek to celebrate, amplify, and support Black voices in psychology and to encourage dialogue around the intersections of psychology, race, social justice, and equity. What we are here for. The Black and Psych organization is founded to one, promote the visibility of Black professionals and trainees in the field of psychology, two, create a community and network of established and aspiring Black psychologists for connection and future collaboration, and three, encourage and hold a space for dialogue around the intersections of psychology, race, social justice, and equity. Who we are here for. Black and Psych is founded to promote visibility, community, and networking opportunities between Black professionals and trainees across the field of psychology, inclusive of all intersectional identities. This is Black and Psych's current team, and you're currently hearing from the current president, Lauren Kendall Brooks. If you're interested in joining our team, please send an email to blackandspsych@gmail.com, visit our website at blackandspsych.org, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Also, the QR code listed on the right side of your screen will also take you directly to our website. Thank you, and I hope you would really enjoy today's seminar.
Welcome everyone to today's Black and Psych series. This is the first one out of the summer series. I'm super excited. Black and Psych, the organization is so excited to have you all here for on the ongoing session with Tina Plaza. Tina, journalist, storyteller, and executive coach. Very excited here, as you can tell. Feel free to drop questions in the chat in the Q&A or raise your hand if you would really like to talk and ask your questions. So let's get started.
Okay, hello guys. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about what we're going to be discussing. This is called Communication with Impact. And what I'm going to be doing is hopefully preparing you for question and answers and interviews and doing it with confidence and also getting some whatever you need out of this, your interviews or your presentations. So with that said, let me just sort of introduce myself. Again, my name is Tina Plaza, and I started off in journalism. I worked in Reno, Los Angeles, and also the Bay Area. But in when I was in Miami as a reporter, I got married and started having kids, and so that changed everything. And so my husband was transferred to Washington, D.C., and I was raising my kids, and I didn't want to stay home for that long. So what I started doing is working with this communication company that did media trainings and presentation trainings. And that was like an easy fit for me because I had been in front of the camera. Now I'm in back of the camera and I'm telling people what reporters like. So I did that for several years. And then my last job was with a research organization. So you might be able to relate to that. And so initially, what I started doing with the research organization, and it was a child research organization, we had an NSF grant to put some of the research that all these wonderful scientists had across the US, putting them on television, on local television. And with that said, Jocelyn, by the way, if you all know Jocelyn, was someone that I interviewed quite a bit. And in this video that I'm about to show you, her advisor is highlighted. Let's take a look.
Yeah, let me share my screen. I'm actually very excited to show this video. As Tina mentioned, I'm in the background there, but my PI was the one that talks at the in the beginning. I think it's almost after the middle point, Rachel Barr. So let's get it going.
On technology and toddlers to advise on stacking up preschool math skills. Parents across the country have a new way to access research-based child development practices in the privacy of their own living rooms. Research like Kathy Hirsch-Passick's study on cell phone use and its effects on language development.
Not just about quantity. What this kind of research shows us is it's about the quality as well. And preserving that conversation is what matters. As researchers, we want to understand that a little bit better. What works, what doesn't work, and why.
And researchers want to share that knowledge with the folks who need it most, parents, with a focus on Latino parents.
New research indicates
a new study shows there might be, but there's a new study which suggests
a new child trend report shows that parents can play a major role in getting teens interested in STEM jobs.
With funding from the National Science Foundation, Child Trends is collaborating with the national syndication company Ivanhoe Broadcast News. This partnership between television news and the research community celebrated a one-year anniversary this year, with more than 105 stations airing news stories in English and Spanish, and with each report averaging 2.5 million views, something that Georgetown professor and child psychologist Rachel Barr has not seen with any of her previous studies.
I was very surprised by how many people actually were able to see the clip. And the fact, I think the other thing that was great was with working with the television crew to make sure it was short enough and concise and clear. That was incredibly helpful for me.
That's even bigger than that one.
This summer, the Child Trends Hispanic Institute published Expanding Latino Parents' Access to Child Development Research Through the News Media, a research brief highlighting findings from a study conducted during the pilot year of the Child Trends News Service project. The brief highlights crucial steps for communicating child developmental research to the public, especially Latino parents. Reinforce well-known research-informed behaviors, even when you know these behaviors have already received widespread public attention. Take time to understand your audience's needs and interests and consider how you can relate your messages to these interests. Use visuals to emphasize the information you want to communicate to depict relatable situations, activities, and outcomes. Carefully consider whether and how to present information related to the achievement gaps between ethnic racial groups. Provide context and a rationale for the gap, including possible factors associated with low income and poverty conditions. Ensure that both the content and presentation of information is relatable to your audiences. One way the Child Trends News Service is doing this is by highlighting the work of child developmental psychologists like Natasha Cabrera of the University of Maryland.
For this study, we looked at a sample of 74, I believe, dyad couples, fathers and children. They were all low income of African American and Latino ethnicity. We found that fathers who are engaged with the kids in these creative, playful ways, children pick up more vocabulary, more words, and they're able to engage with their fathers linguistically a little better.
It's a win-win situation. For parents to be able to adopt parenting practices that can best support their children's educational success, they must have access to high-quality research that is communicated effectively. And for researchers like Rachel Barr, this is a way of sharing important research widely and in a very professional way.
I think having those clips just available, it reaches not just the parent audience, but we've used these clips in presentations, in teaching, to show students about the importance of conveying messages and the importance of sharing your research. So it's not just sort of cooped up in this little ivory tower.
Yeah, so I did that when I was my first year of my PhD. I had no idea how to do it first. My PI was involved in the whole project, so it was quite a nice, nerve-wracking experience.
Yeah, and we did use Jocelyn for a lot of our videos because, as many of you know, she speaks Spanish fluently. And so we were able to interview her, and she was wonderful. She really, and we'll get a chance to see her on camera. I put her on the spot, and we'll see that later on. But anyway, that project I think I worked on for 4 years, which was really a great experience because I met a lot of researchers, and I came to understand that, scientists have so much information to give, but sometimes they don't know how to share it with the public, or they don't know how to make it concise enough, to make it so people like myself, understand it. And so that's what we're going to do right now. One of the things after NSF, I continued work at this organization, and I started training some of the researchers to do their webinars, because they do a lot of presentations, and work on their slides, how to make them, easier on the eye and just easier to understand and all that. And we're going to touch on some of those subjects. And if you have any questions, let's stop now to talk about that. Also, if you have had any bad experience with the media, or, want something, let us know right now or as we go along. I think Jocelyn is going to be monitoring the chat. So any questions right now, Jocelyn? No questions?
Questions,
Okay. So we're going to go on to my next slide, which is basically Media Interviews 101. And this is what we mean, like what we teach just anybody who's going to have any type of interview, whether it's a podcast, especially for scientists. Avoid all science jargon. Like, let's say, oh yeah, this was, we did a systemic review or randomized control trials. So it was a quantitative study. People like myself, now I know, but people like myself don't understand what you're talking about. So try to, when you're talking to a publication that has nothing to do with science, try to keep it, just like you're having a conversation, no jargon. If you're talking to like Psychology Today, then you can use some of those words and some of that language. It might be even helpful to use some of that. Also, one of the things that we talk about is be honest. If you don't know the question to an answer, don't pretend you know it and start lying and so on. We don't want that, right? We don't want that. And also be personal. What do I mean by be personal? Just like, be like you're talking to your friend. Don't like be all stiff and oh. Be personal. Also, use personal stories and anecdotes, and we're going to talk about that later, to help you get across an idea or a concept. Okay, be brief. Some scientists can go on and on and on and on. Keep your science concise and digestible so people could understand. Be committed and sincere. And that's sort of like, be honest. If you're talking about like your science, like, well, yeah, it was a randomized trial. We had 4 out of 5, that did do this or other, or you're saying we're very excited about this. That is going to get the soundbite that the reporter needs, and that soundbite is going to be used. So try to be committed and sincere and sound excited about what you're doing. Sometimes, you're so tired that you don't even want to be excited about it, but it really comes across on camera or even on radio. And last but not least, prepare, prepare, prepare. What I mean by that is we're going to talk about coming up with 3 messages. And you would practice on your own. You can practice on your own or with a friend before you do an interview, and you practice those messages, how to, no matter what question the reporter throws at you or anyone who's interviewing you, you'll be prepared with 3 messages that you want to get across, whatever the case. You also, by preparing, I also mean, okay, let's say somebody calls your institution or your organization and says, we want to talk about this research that just came out. It's very exciting, blah, blah, blah. Can you give us Jocelyn to talk about? If I were Jocelyn, I would look up that, let's say it's a radio station. I would look up that radio station and find out, are they a jock, like a jock station where they're all laughing, or are they NPR, What kind of media is asking for this interview? That's really, really important. And also look up the reporter that's going to be interviewing you. What do they tend to focus on? Are they, do they lean left? Do they lean right? What do you, want to get across to them? Because then you're prepared to talk to them and you're prepared for some of the questions that they may ask. So that is sort of Media 101 in a gist. Any questions about this? Anything that you're curious about? Jocelyn, anybody?
No
So
question.
far? So far, nothing?
No,
Okay. Oh, there's one.
no, it says no question so far.
Okay. Okay, so now we're going to go when you're preparing for an interview. Oh, and also presentation, which we will get to later on. You want to know who is in your audience. By that I mean, just like I gave you an example of a radio station, who's going to be listening to that, to that radio station? Is it young men, who don't care about that subject? How can you include something that will get them interested in what you're talking about? Or is it parents who, are listening to television as they're trying to fold clothes or do whatever they're doing, because parents are doing a lot of things at the same time? You want to include things that will interest them, because the first question you ask yourself when preparing for an interview is, who is in the audience? If it's young adults, do the young adults follow this podcast? Is this psychology today? So this is more of a science community that's going to be listening to you. So you're going to be talking to people, and this is to people who know what you're talking about, to know the science. And this is really important. And I used to tell this story when I was doing presentation trainings all the time, or media trainings. Is like, who is in your audience? You want to get in their head. What do you want to say that will interest them? And I used to say, when my twins were little, they used to go to the orthodontist, and I would come home after visiting the orthodontist, and my husband had just come home, and I'm like talking to him about my day and mentioning that the orthodontist is saying, my kids need to brush their teeth more often, need to really take care of that situation. And he's like half listening, but not really listening to me. And so after I said, well, he said it was like, just flushing $7,000 down the drain. All of a sudden, I got his attention, because what is in it for him? What is he interested in? How much money we're spending, and are we getting our money's worth? So that's the way I put it to people that I do media trainings with, is like, think about who is in your audience and what would interest them. So you would want to include that in your messaging with some things that you have to say. You can't do that all the time, but you want to think about that. Who is in your audience and how are we going to grab their attention? Okay. Any questions so far? Nothing?
I have a question. Someone asked, do you have any advice on how to be brief during these interviews? This can be quite challenging when research is complex and there is a lot to say. Are there things we should prioritize, or is this like circumstantial?
Well, first of all, what I did when I was working with some of the researchers is I would like, okay, so this is long. Well, don't they do like results, or what is it? It's not just results, but like,
Conclusions.
what?
There is a conclusion paragraph.
Conclusions, find out what the gist of if this is just to a lay public and you want to explain it, this is what we found. You want to start with that, and then, explain to them in, lay language why it's important. So don't, briefs are long, just get to the gist. What matters to people? And that's my advice I have. I know that briefs are very long, and it also depends on what type of media. If it's psychology today, I would focus again on the gist of it, but I would talk about the actual research, about the science of it. Is it quantitative, qualitative, longitudinal? You see, I know all these words because I've worked with a lot of researchers. Does that answer your question?
We'll find out later.
We'll find out later. Okay. So now we're going to the gist of this. This is, you want to craft your message. And what I mean by that, it's the heart of your message. It reinforces your main idea. You want to write 3 messages before you do an interview. This could be, you could also do a call to action if you're talking about, let's say, like Jocelyn talks a lot about children in the media. By call to action, she would say, we really want parents to call their legislators and say, you must remove you must remove media, in the classrooms because this is what it's doing, blah, 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 blah. And so you also want to be in your message, be visual. You want to show something, like if you're talking about the results, the main result of your research, and I'll give you an example here. I did uh, I did like the messaging for research that came out of the Hispanic Center at Child Trends. And the actual, I mean, there were other, they had other results, but the main result was that Latino children are 3 months behind their peers in when they start kindergarten. So think about that. They're 3 months behind their peers. You could say it this way. So what is it? Let's say I'm the reporter and I ask you, so what is this research? What is the outcome of this research? Well, what we found is, Latino children overall come into kindergarten 3 months behind their peers. You could say it that way. Or if you want to be more visual and kind of let the public see what you're talking about, I told the researcher, why don't you say, imagine this, you are at a race and there are children, white children and other races, 3 yards ahead of Latino children. That is what we found. And so people are actually picturing that. Oh my goodness. So they never get, to the start of the line like everybody else. What do we do about that? That is a little bit more visual. And there are so many ways that you can use that in your messaging. Another way that you can use some of that is like, and I'll give you an example. I was doing something on COVID. And, during COVID, everybody sort of became immune to the numbers, They, like people were reporting 100,000 people died today, or here in Cleveland, 200 people died. And the numbers didn't really hit hard, for some people after a while. So one of the things that I told them to say is, why don't you say 200 people died in Cleveland today? That is like an airplane falling down every day and killing everybody in that airplane. That is a lot more visual, and that's something that is more impactful. So these are little ways that you can be impactful. And needless to say, I didn't go over this with Jocelyn on our first initial interview, but she did give me 3 messages that she wanted to get across during her interview, which we're about to play for you. Jocelyn, can you play that? No, actually read your messages that you want to get across.
Yeah, so in this mock interview, which is familiar to what I was doing during my PhD, I had 3 main messages and one that I really wanted to, and like an extra one that I wanted to make sure to say it during the interview. First one is not just a screen time, it's a screen context. Young children learn best from people, not just screens. And the third message was blaming parents for screen time use misses the bigger picture. And the one phrase I really wanted to say before I did the interview was the goal isn't 0 screen time, it's a smart screen time. And you'll see what happens when I do the interview.
Okay, so we are going to go ahead and she's going to play the video because we were practicing with this and I think it works better when she plays it.
Yeah.
Jocelyn Rocha, thank you so much for meeting with me. We did get your press release and we're going to get to that in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to ask you a little bit about something that's been on the minds of so many people nowadays. The fact that a lot of universities are losing their funding for their research. Has that affected your work at all, or the researchers there at Georgetown?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for the invitation again. Sadly, yes, it has been affecting quite a bit. It's not a current issue. Actually, technology is evolving faster than ever, and there's so many questions we still need to answer. But currently, the study on how these new changes affect children's development is seriously underfunded now more than ever. In the meantime, as part of the CAFE consortium in collaboration with Rachel Barr here at Georgetown, I'm working to close this gap as much as possible with whatever little we have. We're studying how parents and children use media together, and in collaboration with international collaborators across the US, Europe, and other South countries, we're trying to answer these questions: how parents are using media, how children are exposed to these different types of media, and how these affect them, at least and not in the long term, but in the short term. Hopefully, we get funding soon and we get to be able to answer more questions in the long term. So.
And my second question is, so is that going to limit what you're doing right now? Because it sounds like it's really important. This is about children and media, and that's a big, concern for so many parents.
Yes, we are trying to find ways that we can compensate for the lack of funding as we have been in the past years. Currently focusing on sending out surveys to parents to facilitate the lack of funding to see parents in person. That ameliorates some of the lack of funding on our part, but we're working with some private institutions to also provide some grants.
So now tell me a little bit about what you know, your research. You study children and the media. How have you looked at how the use of the media and telephones and smartphones and everything affects children's mental health? As you know, it's been getting worse and worse.
Yes, media can have negative outcomes, especially when it replaces real interactions with caregivers and yourself. It's also very dangerous in terms of when it's exposed to violent content or when it dominates a child's everyday. But not all screen time is harmful. What matters is the content, the context, and whether it supports or disrupts connection, learning, and like these healthy routines that we have with our children.
Okay. And finally, tell me about the newest research and why you sent us this press release. We're excited to see this, and what kind of a difference do you think it's going to make on a parent's life? Can you stop that right
Yeah, I
there?
think it's very important for us to walk away.
Yep.
Okay. What I did there is I'm basically feeding her what she wants to talk about and see if she talks about this research. Like, we're very excited, blah, blah, blah. Paint a picture for us. Let's just see that.
Away from the common question of how much is too much screen time, and rather focus more on what the content of the media that we have. What matters most isn't just how much media my child is using, but how interactive it is, how developmentally appropriate it is, and ideally, whether am I sharing that with my kid or not. Screens support learning. These are tools that can actually have strong beneficial outcomes to our children. Children are able to learn through media after so many years thinking that that's not possible. In reality, it is. It does require a little bit more guidance, but that's the fun part, I think, that we believe as researchers is that we are using these tools to create connections between the caregiver and the child to make these learning experiences even stronger and long lasting.
Was that it?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay. Before I start sharing again, I'm just going to talk a little bit. How do you think you did, Jocelyn?
I was thrown off by the question about grants because I prepped for it. It wasn't that out of nowhere. I did prep for the interview, but I prepped for questions that could possibly be that we normally get asked in the media world. We get asked how many
Mhm.
hours is too much time for my baby, for my child, and they want
Uh-huh.
a specific number. So I prepped for answers that could take me out of that scenario.
Mhm.
I did not prepare for the question of grants.
No,
Even
you didn't. This was a baseline interview. This was a
yeah,
baseline interview. And like I saw, you did get to your points, but you could have been like driving the bus. What do I mean by driving the bus? Is like if I give you a question about the grants and you could have used one of those transitions that we talked about, and we'll talk about it later, is well, that's not my expertise, but what I know is when I go into Georgetown, I see so many scientists working. We are still working on this very important project, which, by the way, let me tell you a little bit about it. And then, then you talk about that project and this is going to make such a difference for parents who are concerned about that, because we know from hearing from them, from watching it in the media, there's a real concern about that. And we're going to bring you ways to feel better about letting your kids use this type of media. So you're painting a picture of parents feeling better. So let me go ahead. One other thing that I noticed, and I don't know, what do you all think about this interview? One other thing that I noticed is and I don't know if you all saw that, is like when she's, it's like she's trying to reach for the words. So when you're in front of a reporter or a camera, because it is, intimidating to talk, in front of a camera, you pretend that that camera is a friend and you're just talking to them. Also, when you do this, it's like you're flailing a little bit and like, help, help, help. Try to just, you can use your hands every once in a while, but not flailing. That's just a little tip. So let's go now. Do we have any questions about that? Jocelyn, should we give them time to react to it?
you can put up your screen while we wait for some questions.
Yeah. No questions so far about that interview. What did you all think? Anybody? Have you ever been in that situation? This is difficult for me because usually when I do media trainings, I'm there in person. And so it's hard, to just talk to you via a computer screen. So I'm doing the best I can. It's very interactive when we do media training. And we get a lot of questions as we do it, and we put everybody on the spot, not just poor Jocelyn. I thought overall she did a very good job. I love her attitude. I love the way she smiles during it all, even though she may not want to be smiling. But let's just look at the chat and see if anybody has any comments about that interview, because we're going to do the same interview again, and we'll see if it's a difference, because it's a process. You practice as you start getting more comfortable with your subject and just with doing interviews, because whenever, when I said prepare, that's the most important thing, is that you have to anticipate that if you work at a university, people are going to ask about the cutting of grants, about protests at your university. Do you agree? Do you not? That's not what you're there for. So we need to have ways to sort of transition to what we want to talk about. And that's where I am now. If you can see these three ways that you can transition, or not three, 5 ways. You can say the key issue is that this research is really going to change a lot of people's lives, because when you see people using or children using their computers, they're going to be learning from it. It's going to be a positive, not a negative. That's another way that you can say it. And then this is one that I call flagging. What's important to remember, if somebody's going on and on and on about something you don't want to talk about, you say, yeah, but what's important to remember is this is going to change a lot of lives, this research, or it's going to affect a lot of parents. And I hope that they really pay attention to what we have to say, our conclusions of this research study, because it took us 3 years of so many of us, so many students being in the lab. And to be honest, this type of research really changed my life. It helped me see la da 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 da, whatever you want to say. Or you could say, here's how we see it. What's more accurate if somebody says, so you're telling people to keep on using, so let's say the reporter says, so you're telling people to keep on using their, giving their kids their smartphones, or, letting them watch television or play games on television. Is that what you're saying? No, what's more accurate, you don't have to get upset, because sometimes they will, come at you like that. Very few times, but some will. You can say, well, what's more accurate is these are just tools again. So you can have, whenever somebody is saying something that you don't want to talk about, okay, or you want to avoid. And here's another flag. Here's what I want everybody to remember, that this study is going so far and blah, 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 blah. We are hoping to do more research. If we get if you're hoping out of this interview to get, funders to look at this interview, we're hoping that, there will be more interest in this type of study and that we can do further. Here's what I want everyone to remember. That raises a flag that says, I want to listen to what she has to say. Any questions about that? Any statements about the interview? Anything?
Yeah, we have two comments about the interview. One is, I like the tip about redirecting when you don't know the answer.
Okay, good.
The other one, I thought the questions were relevant to the current climate and liked that there was a flow.
Yeah, so this is, having been a reporter, whenever I had an interview about something that, that they sent a press release, and I was able to get, in front somebody like the police department, it's like, what is happening? Why are so many people being abused, what they call abuse, during I would ask something like that, during arrest or something like that. And that would obviously put a police officer who was just there to tell me about a shooting that night or something like, uh-oh, what would he say? Well, listen, that's not my, that's not my expertise, but I can find you someone after we talk about this one case. So that's an example. But if there's something that's like really controversial and timely and is happening now, you can bet you can write it in there. You're prepare for this question, and how will you refocus the interview? Don't get upset. Don't, look rattled or anything, because this can happen. And it has happened. I know when as a reporter, I don't mean to be mean, but this is an opportunity for me to get a really good story that no one else has. And I would ask that. Sometimes they'll get mad at me, and that's not a good way to respond to a question that you don't want to answer. You want to act like it doesn't bother you at all. No, what's important to remember is that blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's go look at some more tools here. And this is more up your alley, I think. Redirect. How to redirect. You can turn a negative or uncomfortable situation into a positive. Now, when your organization sends out a press release to a reporter, and that reporter finds out that you represent, say, a university, and it has been involved in a controversy, like a timely controversy. How about protests at schools? That's a pretty timely issue. It's still happening, and some universities are losing funding because of that. Let's say I just ask you as as a representative from university who's just doing some science, I ask you, how do you feel about the way the university is handling those protests? You feel uncomfortable? And then, you would feel uncomfortable answering that. So again, you would say, that's not my area of expertise. I can get you to the right person to answer that question. On the contrary, here at Georgetown, we're working on really some fascinating studies. That would be something to say when they're asking about the funding cuts. Well, what's more accurate is, right here, as you saw when you walked in, the lawn, everybody is working, getting along famously, but that's not my area of expertise. What I can tell you is just kind of smooth over it. Don't let it upset you. Does that make sense? Anybody?
Yeah, I have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
One is, when is it appropriate to embed methodology in the interview?
Okay. If it's very simple, you could, in an interview, meaning like with the media, there's different types of media, as I said earlier. There's media like podcast. What kind of podcast is it? Is it science people that really understand what you're talking about? Then involve that. But if you're talking to the media, meaning media that is on your television every day, the people watching that, you gotta remember to aim for eighth grade level of understanding. I tell a lot of people who are experts in their field, like in science or whatever, aim for eighth grade level of understanding. So that meaning, I'm not meaning to say that you can never use it. You can use it when you're interviewing with a writer who is writing for Psychology Today or something like that. That would be ideal. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah.
And there was another question someone else asked. Is it okay to ask them to share the questions before the interview?
Great question. I I don't usually like to share. Not that I'm doing that now, but I didn't like to share my questions. But I think it's okay to say, well, we will be talking about this, and this, but do not be surprised if they come up with another question, because they will. And never think that they're, like the reporter's really friendly, you're getting along with her, that you can say, well, you know what's going on with the research team, really. Never think that just always be very careful about what you say to a reporter. I would say it's okay if it's like a serious publication that takes, that's gonna be, let's say, a magazine article in, what is the popular one right now that I love? Starts with an A, Jocelyn. I can't think of the name. Anyway, this is going to run like 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. Yeah, send them like, we're going to be talking about this and that, but always expect that they're going to be throwing you a curveball, and that, you should be ready for that. How do you transfer or refocus them, the reporter, to something else? Never get too friendly with a reporter. Not that they're mean or anything, but you don't want to get too friendly, because you don't want them to, to find out something that could put your organization in a bad light. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to do the follow-up interview with Jocelyn and see if any of you see any improvement. Hi, Jocelyn. Thanks for joining me for this interview. I wanted to ask you about something that's been on the minds of so many people. A lot of universities, as you know, are losing their funding for research. Has that affected your work at all?
Yeah, it's true that research funding is tight right now, but we're still moving forward with exciting work. Here at Georgetown, Dr. Rachel Barr and I, who part of the Early Learning Project, together with the Cafe Consortium, we're exploring how families use media in everyday life. We're not hitting pause, we're just getting more creative. We're partnering with families, community organizations, nonprofits, and even developers to make our research more accessible and based on real life experiences.
And so when you say you're not going to pause, you're getting more creative, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, we're finding new collaborations with people in our community. We are finding new for-profit organizations that support research in media and media developing and child development.
Okay. And is that going to limit what you're doing right now, the loss of some of these grants?
Not at all. If anything, I think it made us more focused on trying to get these questions answered. We're currently here at Georgetown delving into how parents, grandparents, and children engage with content together and how that can support learning and development. One family, for example, told us a story how their child looks forward every night to a story time with their grandparent who lives out of state. So that experience makes bedtime a fun and interactive event, despite the miles of distance between them. So our work, it's all about transforming these everyday media development, media moments into opportunities for connection and growth.
Okay, have you looked at how the use of the media, telephone, smartphones affects children's mental health? As you know, that is a growing problem here in the US.
Yeah, there is growing evidence that certain types of media, especially social media, it's linked to increased depression, risk of depression, anxiety, and I forgot suicidality. Oh my
Stop
God,
it
I'll
there.
say
Stop
that
it there.
again. But
Okay. Just
there's
stop it there for
growing
a second.
evidence that certain types of media, especially
Okay, so what I wanted to bring up is if you're doing a recorded interview, that means like a reporter comes to you and is recording the interview, do not hesitate if you stumbled or something to say, can you ask that question again? Because it's recorded and the reporter wants to get the best soundbite. They don't want you stumbling or anything. So that was great that she said, oops, can we do that again? Okay, go ahead.
social media can be linked to increased risk of depression and suicide, particularly among adolescents. But it's not just about how much screen time children have access to. The risk is highest when media promotes comparison, cyberbullying, and isolation. But on the flip side, social media and media overall can be a source of support. It can offer connection that otherwise children wouldn't have access to, especially during COVID times, for example. It can help identity development and access to mental health resources that otherwise they wouldn't have access to as being part of marginalized communities.
And finally, tell me a little bit about the newest research, and that's why I'm here today, because we got this press release from you all, and why you sent us this press release. What's so important about this research? What's different?
Yeah, we're excited to share some findings that emphasize the importance of context in media use. Our research, including our work with the CAFE Consortium, indicates that co-viewing and discussing the content with children during these media moments enhances learning and comprehension and connection with the real world experiences. So Dr. Barr's recent studies highlight how young kids, even toddlers, learn best when media experiences are interactive and it's supported by a caregiver. Parents don't need to eliminate screens; they just need to use them with intention. That means choosing high quality content, age appropriate content, watching together whenever it's possible, setting clear boundaries around screen time and sleep time and daily routines. It's about balance, not perfection. So the goal isn't zero screen time, it's a smart screen time.
Very good. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to. Very good. What do you all think of this? I mean, huge. I see like 100% difference. Are there places that she could have improved a little bit? Of course, and we'll talk about that. Tell us about how you felt about this one, Jocelyn, Jasmine.
I felt more confident about the answers, and I felt like I had more control too on the interview. I try my best to bring it back to my topics, any of my messages, and any of the questions I was answering. Yeah.
What do you all think? Do you have anything to say about the second follow-up interview? Do you have any notes, Jocelyn?
Of what to do better, I still need to watch my hands.
No, I thought you were pretty good with that. But has anybody said anything in the chat? Because I can't see the chat.
No,
No?
no.
Okay. So we'll take it that you guys like it and agree with us. If you don't, or if you have any questions about that, let us know. So I was taking some notes while she was talking, and I loved that she mentioned Rachel Barr. You know, whenever you get an opportunity, you always want to take this as a way to market where you are. Georgetown, Rachel Barr. You know, she was very good about, doing that in this one interview. Also, I love we're not hitting pause. I love that, because you can actually see somebody, what are we going to do hitting pause? And we don't have funding. I love that. That's different from the previous ones. Um, New collaborations. Now, here's where I think I could have seen a little bit of an improvement, Jocelyn, is like, so we have new collaborations. You don't have to mention them because you don't want to put them in the spot or anything. But, we are writing proposals. We are looking at blah, blah, blah. Just sort of paint a picture of how you are responding, because it's sort of like an emergency for a lot of universities. It's not going to stop. We are going to continue studying this because this is something, just be a little bit more enthusiastic about what you're doing. But for me, this was like night and day. And I want to hear from some of you all to see if you see the difference.
Yeah, we have one comment says she appeared more positive and upbeat in the second one, also more prepared.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And just to remind you all that it's a process. Like usually or typically when I would do some of these media trainings, we would come in, give them the media 101, okay? They would have a subject that they were going to be, because that's why they would hire us. They were going to be doing, let's say, an environmental conference, going to an environmental conference and wanted to practice interviews. And so we would do sort of a baseline and then critique them in a nice way, not be mean or anything, something that they could learn from, give them the tools, and then come back and do a second interview. And then after that, do it again. We would do it in a day, like 3 or 4 times, and you could literally see them changing so much, one step, next step, next step. And at first they're very, oh my God, I don't want to be on camera. I don't want to see myself. I hate the way I sound. We all hate the way we sound. But it really is very, very helpful to get this kind of training. One other thing, I wanted to show you yet another video. In this one, we didn't do a follow-up, but you just see the different type of questions that I answered because it's a mock interview with Psychology Today. So go ahead. This would probably be written too, by the way. Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you for joining me. I'm writing, as you know, for Psychology Today, and I want to know a little bit about what your team is doing at Georgetown. Can you explain what is your theoretical orientation and how does it inform your approach to therapy?
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. We're currently looking here at Georgetown with our collaborator Rachel Barr and other consortium members at the CAFE collaborative work here in the United States and Europe. We're working on learning how children are experiencing the use of media and exposure and how parents are using these different techniques for these different outcomes. There is a lot of research right now currently looking at whether parents are able to use media in successful manner and whether children are able to learn through it. We have shown consistently that that is the case. Children are able to learn through media. It is harder for them to do it, but those effects go away immediately when we do have the support of a caregiver, of another person, providing them and bridging that gap between the 2D and the 3D world. Currently, we're trying to learn more about the different ways people are using. So right now, we know a lot about the effects of it, some of the effects of media on children, but we don't know how parents are using it and why. The reasoning behind is very important for us to learn more about, and that's one of the main goals right now, so we can address that in different realms like therapy, the real world, education and learning. Because right now, we just assume that parents are using it in the same way, and that is not the case. So involving parents and learning the why behind of it will help us and our field learn more about what other questions we should be asking that actually helps the parent and children in all this journey, especially now that technology is changing so drastically and so quickly more than ever.
And it's also affecting a lot of children. Some people say that mental health is deteriorating because of all this technology.
Yes, there is growing evidence that certain types of media, especially social media, can be linked to increased risk of depression, suicidality, and particularly among adolescents. But it's not just about a screen and they use the time that they are in front of a screen. The highest risk is when media promotes comparison, cyberbullying, or isolation. But on the flip side, media can also be a source of support, offering connection, identity, and access to mental health resources that adolescents, especially for minoritized communities, will not have access to otherwise.
Okay, lastly, how do you stay up to date with the latest research in psychology?
Thank you so much. I think one of the biggest sources that people are using right now is using Psychology Today and magazines like this one to help bridge the gap between what is going on in the lab and what is going on in the real world. Thank you so much for the invitation again. This is one of the greatest sources of information for families and other researchers.
And my last question, because this has been on a lot of people's minds, is are the cutbacks on grants and on federal grants and everything else affecting Georgetown research?
Yes, currently there are some setbacks in terms of funding. This is not new for us. We've had some lack of funding in terms of technology and how media affects children overall. Media happens, changes in technology is evolving faster than ever, which makes it even harder to create grants on time. Like we put a grant now, 5 years from now, there's a whole new platform to learn about, and we just finished this grant learning. So we're definitely running behind the clock. But we're currently, I think, situations like these ones are strengthening the connections with other collaborators across the US and internationally in ways that we can make the science we do have access to even stronger and more accessible for the community.
Well, thank you very much, Jocelyn.
Thank
Okay, so Jocelyn, while I move over to share, how do you feel about this one?
I feel like I went longer than expected. This was
You were driving the bus.
I was
Yeah, you were definitely driving the bus, but I wonder if you could have included a lot more technical aspects because to explain this research, because this is the audience that would, Psychology Today. So this is your opportunity if any of you get an interview with here, I'm sharing now.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to find the balance of lab tech to talking to the general population. And it's like,
What could you have used? What technical jargon do you think you could have used that the readers of Psychology Today would have understood? Like, what about the study would you want to talk about?
Yeah, we'll have talked more about the methodologies, the cognitive frames that I had in the memory studies that we have in our lab. I did not mention any of that.
And you can mention that. I mean, you don't have to get into the weeds so much so, but really the most important points about the science, because the readers of Psychology Today are going to be interested. What makes this study different from other studies? A lot of other researchers have studied, the media and its effect on children and so on. So what you want to do is, again, any interview is an opportunity for any of you to really push the type of work that you're doing. And there could be many reasons why you want to do this is because maybe you want to get more funding. You want to use an interview like a presentation, which we're going to be talking about just coming up right now, as an opportunity to really make yourself look better you know, and sort of get the message that you want to get across. Not that the reporter wants, but you got to make your message interesting. So the reporter says, "Ooh, I'm going to use that soundbite." That, that's why I said put color into your interviews. Uh, Put if you want data that's really interesting, like wow, you see a bar this way, and then 1 year later it's down here. That would be wow. Okay, so that type of data you want to use. Okay, now let's go on to talk about presentations because I did a lot of those trainings when I was working with researchers at my previous job. And I know a lot of you all do presentations during webinars and so on. Did you guys do a lot of that? Let me just ask in the chat if somebody wants to talk about that. Do you do a lot of presentations that you want some tips? Because we have plenty.
Carla says yes.
Yes. And what questions do you have? What makes you feel uneasy about your presentations that you give? And who do you present to?
Wants tips to make it more engaging.
Make it more engaging. That's what we're going to talk about. And it's very similar to doing media interviews, but this is really, I think, more than anything else, important to really get into your audience and what they care about. And I'm going to be talking about several experiences that I've had doing presentation training with some of the researchers here. And I know like in a week, you're going to be talking to somebody's going to be talking to you about storytelling. I do a lot of that when I help people with their presentations, but presentations. I wanted to touch on presentations because so many of you are involved in webinars where you explain your work, your research. It could be your audience could be legislators, it could be parents, it could be other researchers. So you really have to keep in mind here, especially who your audience is and whether it's going over their head or, you're really connecting to them. Okay. This is something that I always tell anyone that before they even start putting their presentation together, what do you want to get out of this presentation? By that I mean, do you want to like if in the audience there's a funder that you really want to attract with your work, then you have to do that presentation and with like, wow, that is something that nobody else has done. Because what is the funder thinking? The funder is thinking, ooh, can this really make my foundation look good by us funding this? So something different, maybe sort of highlight the different. Also, think about what you want to accomplish with your presentation, whether it be a webinar or anything. What do you want to accomplish with that? You want to highlight your work. You want to get better at presenting, or you want your organization to come to you when you have these presentations, because that gives you, more people are watching you, more eyes are on you. And so that's what you might want to accomplish, just simply doing a really good job. And then your organization coming to you when it's time to do another webinar. That means that you're valued, right? And think about your audience. And here's where we start thinking about your audience in presentations. What is their knowledge? Here we go with this one. For example, if you're talking about your very similar to doing media interviews, if you are, what do they know about what you're saying? Let's say it's home visiting. I did this in at Child Trends, home visiting. Do many people know? If you're talking to funders, do they know what home visiting is? Then maybe you should explain it. You should explain what home visiting is, why it's so successful and why you wish that it would grow a little bit more. That's what I would say, Now, what are their demographics is another thing. You really, when you're presenting to somebody, what are their demographics? Are they white men who really don't care about some of your research, but they do care about how much money this is gonna save the state. If they're policymakers who really care about how much money this is going to save the state, if you use some of this research, or you get programs to take up that research that you're working on, then you got to think about those things. And what is their expectation? What do they want to get out of this? You don't want to put them to sleep, but you really want to, they're really looking for some innovative research that will, make their state look better. And here we go. We're going to sort of get into the head of legislators. Now, let's just say you're presenting in front of policymakers or someone representing your organization. You want to ask yourself, what do they want to know? What can you do in your presentation that can convince them to vote in my organization's favor? And so we do a little exercise whenever I do presentation trainings. We do this. We're getting into their head. This is, the man there is a policymaker. And what is he thinking as he's listening to you? How much will it cost? Can we afford this as a state? Will this impress my constituents that I supported this type of legislation that you're talking about, that you're endorsing? How can I prove return of interest? Or, how can I show that there is going to be a return of investment in this research? So those are some of the things that they could be thinking. So when you get in their head, then you know that, they're going to be, you want to include some of that stuff in your presentation. You don't want to go wild with, with all this jargon about how the research works and so on. You want to get to the gist of it, why it's important and why you're there talking about it. So that's why it's so important that you know who your audience is. If it's parents, what are they concerned about? Well, parents are concerned about how to keep their kids safe, what can save them money. Think about what is in a parent's head. And I will do one. I think I can give you an example of a presentation training that I did for a webinar at the recent organization I worked for. They were talking in front of Head Start workers. And they were telling them how to work with the parents. The researchers were telling them how to work with the parents, what their research says about how to work with the parents who are currently have kids at home who aren't going to Head Start. And so I said to my colleague, why don't we include an interview with one of these parents? And so I went to one of the community organizations in Los Angeles, and they provided a person that was willing to talk about her situation. She had I think like 4 kids under 5. She was home with them all the time. And she's talking about how the fact that Head Starts are closed and she is having to deal with her kids, affected her life. And we put parts of her interviews throughout the workshop or webinar. And we got 600 people respond to that. And it wasn't so much to the information that the researchers were giving, it was the fact that they had a real person being affected, so when you put a real person in some of these webinars and some of your research that you're presenting, it really makes a difference. So really hearing from the people affected makes a big, big difference. Here we go. We're going to do a little walkthrough about how to improve your presentation. Again, no jargon, use accessible language. Provide context to what you're saying. So let's say you found out, like that research that I told you about, where Latino children are three, if there were 3 years behind, 3 months behind their peers. And you just say that, and so people are going to say, well, are they like not smart? Are they, what's wrong with the parents? Why aren't they? You need to provide context. And what by that I mean, say, well, because they, part of this is because they do not have the resources that their peers have. And this is something we want to change, blah, 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 blah. You're providing context for them. You're not leaving the numbers out there for people to interpret them the way they want to interpret them. And do takeaways. So what do you take away from this? It's important that policymakers focus on education and people who are under resources. And another thing I focus on when we do presentation trainings, when I work with some of the researchers, is transitions. You can't go from talking about, statistics to talking about something completely different. You got to sort of find a transition to talk about that. And that's what we practice when we do presentation coaching. So any questions about any of this?
I have one question asked. How can I seek opportunities to engage with media? And how do you make connections with the media?
How do you make connections with the media? Well, depending on what organization you're working for, or, things have changed with the media. The media landscape has changed quite a bit since. But what I would do is, if you're interested in attracting information or attracting a reporter's attention, I would go to their social media and and find out, let's say it's the New York Times, follow your favorite journalist and say, hey, we have this really wonderful, send them a note on social media, not for everybody to see, just a private message, and say, listen, we're working with this organization. We thought you'd be interested in this research. And that's important because, they get so many emails, and that's just not working anymore. I think it's more important to reach out to them via, social media, or if you know somebody who works for them, hey, tell them that I'm going to be sending them this. That's important. And another way that you might, everybody, has like their ego. So to stroke their egos, to say, oh, I was really fascinated by this story that you did, where you worked on children and the media and so on. We thought you'd be interested in hearing about this new research. Send it to them via, you can completely do the email thing. You should do that, but also get into their messages, in social media and so on. That you also have to be timely, and that's really important with researchers. So with reporters. So let's say the George Floyd incident was last week. If you have any information regarding how people are affected years later by abuse or low resources or so on, your research has found this. This is a good time. You have to make it timely. So this is a good time to reach out to some of the journalists because they're interested in doing something that is happening now. Gun control, there was a shooting at a high school. Let's say there was a shooting at a high school yesterday. And then if you've done some research on that and you've come up with something that's really eye-opening, this is a time to reach out to them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, I think we're getting towards the end. Oh, okay. Slides. And this is really important for researchers, scientists. And I saw this a lot in my previous job is, you have these slides with really complicated numbers and all this, and your audience is looking at your slides and trying to understand how that works. There's arrows pointing this way and then arrows pointing here and then bloom, just all over the place. So your audience is watching your slide and not really listening to what you're saying. So what I always tell, what I always tell researchers, especially and scientists, is like, keep it simple. Your slides are supposed to enhance what you're saying. You don't want your audience distracted by, those slides that are really, really busy. So always keep your slides simple. And it's not just researchers. Oh my goodness, these government workers that I worked with, they would go over their presentations and all of them were like, putting us to sleep. You want to really, really keep it simple if you can. I love graphs, but they should be easy to understand. And if you do have a graph or something, don't be afraid of saying, well, this red block over here represents this. Walk them through it. That's important. Any questions about that? Do you guys have trouble when you're doing presentations, finding slides? I'll wait a minute and then see what people have to say. That's a big issue, I think, with a lot of people who aren't communicators.
I feel like at the beginning of my journey, I
Huh?
tried to be more engaging and dynamic. So I started adding GIFs to my presentations, but I didn't realize how distracting that was being, or adding videos, but then the conference where I was couldn't connect to the audio. And then there was or it, somehow the video got corrupted. So now I'm back to only when necessary, I will use dynamic media unless I know where exactly I'm going. Like I'm sure
Yeah.
either I have a trial test period. And if I do GIFs, to make sure that they stop at some point so they don't keep going while I'm talking. So
Yeah, it's sort of like what we were doing this morning, Jocelyn, is we really were practicing. We thought we would embed the videos in this presentation, in this PowerPoint, and it just wasn't working. So we decided, okay, well, maybe we should have Jocelyn run the video and I just do the PowerPoint. So you have to think about all those things, prepare like in your presentation, because you don't want people distracted by, these little things. But it is important to have data, obviously, but you also want to not distract from what you're saying. You want them to be listening to you. Anybody else have a story about that? If not, we're going to go to our next one, which is storytelling. So, and this is the art of connecting with the audience. And this is so important when you're doing a presentation. You don't know how many times, I'm doing presentation coaching with some researchers, government workers, or so on, and they're going on and on and on about what they're doing. And you're not really connecting with the audience. So the most important thing is to tell a story. And what I'm talking about is, for example, I did like an edu health, school health webinar where I was actually doing presentation training for a lot of the people that were going to be presenting in this webinar. Some of them were from my organization, some of them were from outside of the organization. And so they were going to be basically the point of this webinar was trying to say, we really need to have health service at all the schools, because it makes a huge difference. And this was during COVID again. And I was doing a presentation training with this nurse who was now no longer a nurse, but she used to be a school nurse. And she's going on and on and out about FIPA and FERPA and HIPAA and compliance and so on. And, it just wasn't hitting home. Like, okay, so she's giving me her presentation. And I said, so you said you were a former nurse, right? You worked at a school. Can you tell me about an occasion where having a school nurse or a health service at your school made a huge difference for a student? And she goes, oh my God, yes, I can use that in my in my presentation. And she said, when I was a school nurse one time, a big football player from our school, he was like the best football player, came in because he wasn't feeling well. He didn't have the resources at home to go to the doctor or anything. His parents hadn't taken him to the doctor. So we started doing, telling doctors to look into this, and they checked him out, and he turned out to have a brain tumor. And this was found in the school. So I said, so if they had not had the service in the school, maybe they wouldn't have found it, early enough, and it would have been, the consequences would have been horrible. So I said, you got to start with that story. You start with that story, and is everybody listening to me right now when I'm talking? Yes, because that's huge, right? So you find a story that you can tell. It doesn't have to be that big, but some story that you can tell, and I'm sure you're going to learn a lot about this. Is it next week, Jocelyn? When you talk to another person who's going to be giving you a presentation, but storytelling is key to presentations. And we finally come to the end where we could ask questions. I'm thanking you for your time. I know this was a long presentation, but I hope you got something out of it. Anybody have any comments, issues that we can discuss about presentations or media interviews? Tell me, Jocelyn, okay? We'll wait a little bit. Or you can comment too, Jocelyn, so we could fill up the time while we...
Yeah, from the sign-up sheet, I have a question of how do I vet interviews and interviewers?
How do you vet them?
Yeah.
An interview, that's so easy. You go to the media that's asking you to interview. Is it the LA Times? Is it a small school newspaper even? You go there, you find out, what who the reporter is, what kind of stories they're interested in, what do they work on, and then you read them, and so you're prepared. Oh, okay, they like to be a little controversial about this. Oh, okay, they're pretty conservative about this issue. I should be careful about the way I phrase things, blah, 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 because their audience is probably pretty conservative if they read these. You can do a lot of research on Google and the interviewer. Anything else?
Do you know of any opportunities out there for people that haven't finished their PhDs yet?
Opportunities in what regard? It like getting the research out?
Yes.
Opportunity, I would say, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by opportunities. Are there job opportunities or how to get media's attention? If this is a time, if you are like almost, if you're just a student and you're working on something that's really interesting and is timely, I really think that you can still get the attention of the media. You have to wait till it's like if you're doing research on the mental health of little children after COVID and how it's affecting, them and what parents can do. If your research has ideas where they can really look into something, I think you would get a lot of interest from the media. Listen, say, hey, I love the work you do. I think you would really be interested in what we're working on. You don't have to be a PhD to get media attention. It helps, but I think that, your experience, your personal experience and your background brings so much to, of interest to a reporter. Well, just remember that you need to prepare. I think what's most important is preparing for this and doing your homework. By this, I mean, if you're going to do a presentation in front of parents, what matters to them. Make sure that you mention something in your presentation about how this is going to change their life or affect them or so on. If you're audience is legislators. What do they care about? We talked about that. They care about how they're going to look by supporting, what you have to sell, by supporting this, how they're going to look to their constituents. How much money is it going to save them? Preparing for all that, doing your homework on the reporter. That's what I'm talking about preparing. And practice your presentations. Like, do what I tell people when I do coaching is write your presentation down, record your presentation. You just start learning everything if you record it. You just start memorizing it, and you're going to be a lot easier. I know it's weird to listen to yourself, but that really helps. You don't have to stand in front of a mirror. Record yourself with a phone. Anything else, Jocelyn?
I think those were all the questions.
Well, any needs, any media or presentation needs that you may have, I have gone out on my own now, and I do one-on-one or group presentation training, and also media trainings now. And so I think that Jocelyn can share my website link. I also do videos. And I did a lot of that at my previous job too. So just, give me a ring, send me an email. I'm here to help. Any questions you may have. That's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tina. And thank you all for staying all the way to the end.
It's a long one.
We do have more talks this summer, and we're excited to have you all in there. I'll send an email with Tina's information in there so you can look up her website.
Thank you.
Well, take care.
Bye-bye.